Hey, welcome to the Fuel the Fight podcast. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Nick Barringer. Another great episode for you. We've got the special guest coming all the way from Arkansas via online, Dr. Arny Ferrando. Dr. Ferrando, his work is mostly in the prevention of muscle mass and functional losses after injury, trauma, major surgery. He's worked with soldiers, anything from investigations that have taken place on the Space Shuttle. Just a great body of work, and he actually served a little bit, and we'll talk about that. But very special guest today, Dr. Ferrando. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Colonel Barringer. Honored to be here.
Yeah. You know, that was one of the things I wanted to kind of start off with, especially anybody with a military background. Can you talk about kind of what brought you in and why you wanted to serve?
Yeah, I was a pretty decent athlete in high school. I was a gymnast, actually, and I got recruited to the Academy for Gymnastics. And I had done very well in high school and got recruited. And I always knew I come from an Italian immigrant family. So it was kind of drilled into me about education. You know, my parents never went to college, although they're both very bright, but they didn't have those opportunities. So they were dead set on the fact that we were going to get education. And so from a young age, it was drilled into me. And so the other side of that is like, how am I going to pay for this education? So, you know, I realized early in life that, of course, I loved being an athlete. I gravitated to that, but I also realized that that was the way to pay your college expenses. You could be a straight A student and get $3,000 a year, or you can be an athlete and get a full ride. So, you know, I set upon that endeavor, and you know, I had a lot of opportunities to go to a lot of colleges. And when I got recruited to West Point and stood on the plane, as you're probably familiar with, you know, that's all it took. It spoke to me, and that's where I needed to be, and that's where I went. And so, you know, started my career. And plus, the other thing too is I always wanted to fly. I didn't fly. In fact, my first flight was actually my recruiting trip to West Point. So, you know, for some reason, I had this desire to fly before I even got off the ground. And again, you know, that's what I ended up doing, as it turned out, thankfully. But so, yeah, I graduated from West Point, and I served, I think, 7 years active duty, and then the other 15, 16 on active reserve. Most of that, I started off as an armor officer, actually. I was in tanks. Yeah, my first time was at Fort Hood in tanks. And that's, you know, in those days, this was the Vietnam era. There was no aviation branch. So you had to go to a ground, as you recall, a combat arms support branch, if you will, or ground branch. So it was either infantry or armor, which was smart. But then again, you know, I went to flight school, and then the rest of my career was in aviation. So, and I loved it. In fact, I say this all the time. If the Army needs an old deaf pilot, give me a ring. I'm in. I'm in.
I'll make note of that just in case.
Yeah.
So you were an Army pilot. You get out, and then you get into research, particularly protein metabolism research. How did that just seems like such a jump for me. How did that happen?
Yeah, you know what, Colonel Barringer, I've been asked that question a million times. I still don't have a good answer for it. I always had, you know, being an athlete, I always had an interest in human performance, and I guess physiology, though I didn't know it at the time. And so after I got off active duty, I went to graduate school at FSU. And that's where I combined like physiology and nutrition, kind of two areas that I really enjoyed. And then after that, I had an opportunity to do a postdoc fellowship at NASA. And that's where it was actually at the time looking at my mentor at that time named Helen Lane, who has since retired, wanted to look at ways, a nutritional means of keeping the astronauts from losing muscle mass in microgravity. And so I was fortunate enough at the time, she was collaborating with Dr. Robert Wolf, who was in Galveston at that time. So I actually spent more time in Galveston than I did at NASA during that time period. But I was fortunate because I learned from the master, literally the man who wrote the book or books on the subject. So It's been a very good relationship. In fact, I've been with him my entire career. It's now been 30 some years that I've been associated and in the same, sharing the same research program with Dr. Wolf. So it's really been an honor and a highlight for me. And that's where I got into all this. So again, he was the master at protein metabolism. And in fact, all the things that most people now take for granted and all the methodologies and all, they were all developed there. They were all, researched there under him. So fortunate, very fortunate.
No, so you get locked in with the master right early in your career, and that sends you down this trajectory. Now, one of the things, in particular for folks that don't know, your work is with essential amino acids, or at least that's a component of your work, and doing that with the warfighters. Why might, for a lot of the lay soldiers out there listening, why might the warfighter take essential amino acids, or should or need to take essential amino acids?
Yeah, thank you. A good question. The essential amino acids are they are 9 amino acids that the human body cannot make, hence the term essential. So they must be taken in the diet. And again, under Obi-Wan's directorship over all those years, we discovered that really to stimulate protein turnover, all you needed, initially at least, was those 9 essential amino acids. And so, over the years, we did probably 30 some clinical trials in that regard in different realms. But the bottom line is that what we have found out, and I'll just give you a general synopsis, what we found out is that the essential amino acids were the primary stimulants for muscle protein turnover. And you say, well, why is that important? Well, you have to keep turning over tissue to make it most viable, most useful, most efficacious, right? The body, every human element has its lifespan, whether it's a cell or whether it's an organ. It has its lifespan. So you have to keep turning over that tissue to make it more functional. And the essential amino acids are the primary stimulus for doing that. Well, we get them in food. Most people get them in food, but we found over the years in all these studies is that the quicker you can raise the peripheral amino acid concentrations, the greater the effect on skeletal muscle. So when you take in a hamburger, while we had done that throughout man's existence on Earth, and that's how we survive, now when we start talking about optimization of performance, that's a whole different story than survival. And so you and I are in the optimization business. And to optimize, the idea is to get those essential amino acids to the periphery as soon as possible and as much as possible. And we found that the simpler forms of ingestion that required little to no digestion were the way to do that. For example, a free amino acid formula. Whey protein is a couple steps back. It's pretty good, but it still requires digestion, but yet it gets a pretty robust response. And you go all the way down to a very low response, which is a mixed meal. And that's how we mostly eat. So to answer your original question, what we're starting to find out, and in fact, that's the work that we've done the last 4 years now with Eucerium and Dr. Stefan Paziakos, is developing a nutritional formula that optimizes that for the soldier, for a stressed or hypocaloric situation, which, as you know, anytime you go to the field, you're hypocaloric, you know what I mean, and you're stressed.
No, and so what I'm hearing is as a soldier is when I go to the field with that MRE or what have you, I might be able to take in less calories and still preserve my lean muscle mass, where I don't see like those big decrements like a Ranger School or those stress situations. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yeah, and that's rarely where you need some sort of essential amino acid formula to provide those, because if you look at the recent work, again, we did out of Eucerium, it shows that, in a hypocaloric situation, you need more of the essential amino acids, but yet they can preserve whole body protein homeostasis, if you will. And that's another thing people have to understand. It's not all about the muscle. In fact, in the stress situation, it's really not about the muscle at all. It's about the whole body. In other words, the whole body has greater priorities than the skeletal muscle, right? Has to have all these organs function, the brain, et cetera, et cetera. And in that regard, all the muscle does is serve as a reservoir for amino acids for the rest of the body. And in fact, I tell this story. In my early days of burn research, what we didn't say is at the beginning there with Bob, Robert Wolf down in Galveston, we were at the Shriners Burns Hospital. And so we were doing burns research. And it was quite evident in those early days that even though the technology for covering the burn and survival of the patient got to be better and better and better, that in the early days we found that when they lost most of their lean mass, they died no matter what. And so the point is that when you and it's stress, and now in fairness, that's a very, very stressed, that's probably the most stressed physiology you could have, right? Obviously, being a soldier or even a ranger school is not that bad. But the point is that during the stress physiology, all those bodily functions that are responsible for life take priority. The muscle's providing for that. When you run out of the reservoir, you get into organ failure, they die. And so that's the whole idea in terms of if you throttle back the stress spectrum to like soldier operations, the idea is that you got to keep that whole organism functioning to an optimal level, especially when you start talking about, we kind of geared a lot of this to SOCOM, to special operators, for example, where they go out, don't eat at all, don't sleep at all, on and on and on, the drill. So the idea is that what can we do to kind of, kick the can down the road, if you will, physiologically speaking, keep them functioning at a near optimal level until mission accomplishment.
No, that's great, and thank you for that excellent description. One thing I do want to kind of take a step back for, because this is important. This is a fight as a dietitian that I'm constantly coming up against. Branched chain amino acids as a supplement, are they worth anything?
So here's the confusion that always happens. The short answer is yes, but not in terms of muscle anabolism. Okay, so the problem is that the BCAAs have always been sold by the supplement world as anabolic, and they're not. We did some studies. In fact, I did one in my early days. More recently, before he passed away, Dr. Kevin Tipton showed that the BCAAs did stimulate muscle anabolism. But I would say overall, if you look at the vast majority of the work, it's a very minimal to little effect. And so it may matter the state of the physiology, et cetera, et cetera. However, an exercise muscle that is exercising to or working to a large degree needs those BCAAs because it oxidizes them. As you know, the muscles is a tissue that has a branched chain keto acid dehydrogenase, like the liver, and it uses those carbon skeletons to convert to energy in a high work scenario. So in that regard, yes, they are very beneficial to the soldier. So if you're out on, operations like an operator, special operator, a high op tempo type scenario, yeah, they would be beneficial in that regard because they'd keep the muscle from eroding in that regard to provide the carbon skeletons. So yes, they are beneficial, but no, they're not, for the most part, anabolic. You need all the essential amino acids. Does that answer? Is that a pretty succinct answer for you?
That does. That's great. But so in order for that soldier to keep moving, if they're in that scenario, would you recommend then a carbohydrate with a branched chain amino acid, so that way they have some of that fuel, but you're saying then that BCA might help prevent that muscle from breaking down, even though it's not anabolic?
I would suggest now, based on the work that we're doing and recently completing at Usarium, that and in fact that's the formula we're developing, EAA, total EAA, and some provision of carbohydrate, because what happens is you need carbon skeletons, wherever they come from. At the beginning, we just provided the EAAs, and we found a lot of those EAAs were just being used for carbon skeletons for a TCA cycle, generate energy. So, and it didn't seem to be any different between providing it as glucose or providing it as additional EAA. Well, for combat feeding directorate there, it's much easier to throw carbohydrates in something the Army makes, and it's shelf stable, and you get all these things that the Army needs for it. So, yeah, to answer your question, I think we're going to arrive at something that has a high EAA formula with some sort of carbohydrate, and probably in a powder form, sachet form that can be quickly put in the canteen, shaken up, and utilized during the operation. Because as you know, being in the Ranger Regiment, it's beans or bullets, and you're stuffing bullets everywhere you can. So you really need to find something that is amenable to that type of operator.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Kind of shifting gears, because another aspect of your research is testosterone. And I find this fascinating because you mentioned about the burns, and I was going to ask about that because I remember as a young dietitian, height of the Iraq War, the burn ward sadly was pretty filled up at Brooke Army Medical Center when I was there. And I remember looking at the patient list of medications and seeing, I think it was oxandrolone on there. And I knew that was an anabolic steroid. And I remember being like, why are we giving burn patients an anabolic steroid? And then it was explained to me, just kind of like you said, hey, it's so catabolic, we can't feed them enough calories. We've got to do something to kind of get over that hump. Can you talk about your work? Because it was your work that led to that.
Yeah, well, it was our work. I mean,
Okay.
So when you were at BAMC, there was a colleague of mine named Dr. Stephen Wolf who came from the Shriners. In fact, he started as a fellow there, I believe, and was involved in all the work, and then has moved on up, through the ranks there. But the idea is that these when you get in a stress physiology like that, there's an anabolic resistance at the muscle level. In other words, the normal effect of EAAs and food no longer exists for the muscle, because again, the body as an organism has reprioritized to keep the organs functioning, et cetera, to wound heal in this case, right? To keep the liver functioning. The liver, as you can imagine, is putting out about a gajillion proteins all associated with healing and the whole 9 yards. So it loses, while they're fed constantly, the feeding doesn't do anything but really keep them alive. And so what we found out is we had to restore an anabolic signal. And in those years, we tried all the anabolic signals, to be honest with you. We tried growth hormone, IGF, insulin. I did some work with insulin and testosterone. And they all give you about the same result, except they do it, some do it much cheaper, testosterone, and some do it with very little vigilance, testosterone. But what's the problem with testosterone? If there's a female, it was not efficacious. And in fact, what you may not know is in the early days, we tried oxandrolone in females, and we had to stop. The androgenic effects were just too overwhelming. So that's the problem. It only treats half your soldiers. Well, I know that there's only about 20% women in the DoD now, but you understand my issue is that you're only dealing with one sex in that regard. But it is quite efficacious and quite easy to administer. And in that regard, the oxandrolone actually was a step down from the testosterone studies I did. It was testosterone anthate. We gave injections, and we found that we were able to get quite a dramatic result. In other words, at the muscle level, we got like a zero balance. In other words, instead of constantly losing this amino acids to the rest of the body, it was able to kind of hang on to its own. That was pretty huge. That was pretty huge in terms of rehabilitative potential and later for rehabilitation. So that's where, that's important in that regard. Now, let's back up again. That's, as I mentioned to you, that's a very highly stressed model, and that's not where the soldier is. The soldier's back down the spectrum a bit. However, again, the work that we've done in conjunction with USARIUM and Dr. Stefan Paziakos, who you were with up in USARIUM, and he's done some very, very nice work in his career. And we've done a lot of things with like SUSOPS types formats and looking at the use of testosterone. And the recent one was done.
And that's sustained. Sorry, Arny. That's sustained operations. Just want to make sure everybody. Yeah.
That since you had a military.
No, just in case. Yeah.
Sustained operations. You're right. So the idea again was looking towards the special operator type format and in a sustained operation. How could we number one, affect lean mass, and number two, affect performance? Well, Pennington, which is an outstanding institution down there, and they have this, I don't know if you're familiar with Pennington Biomedical Center there, but they have one of the most unique research facilities and capabilities in the country, in the world, to be honest with you. And they do a fantastic job at conducting research down there. Dr. Jennifer Root and her team, fabulous. So Stefan just finished up a study down there where we kind of had three phases. A lead-in phase, a 21-day phase where he beat the hell out of the volunteers, and then a 21-day recovery phase, and placebo versus testosterone. And there was a follow-on from another study. He called it Ops 1 as the first study and Ops 2 the second study. But the bottom line is that the testosterone was able to maintain lean mass through all the SUSOPS type format. And I think that, and we are just actually kind of finished up. We just finished up and we're actually writing up the paper on the protein kinetics. And as we had hypothesized, the effect is at the muscle level. So you're able to maintain the muscle as desired, if you will. So the unfortunate thing is that we found in both circumstances, we found no effect on performance. However, I think the problem is that in order to affect performance, and you of all people can understand this being in a Ranger regiment and going to Ranger school, in order to affect performance, there has to be more, there has to be a greater impression on the physiology than just the physical aspect. And that's hard to mimic. And that's where we have problems in terms of our modeling this in a research environment. That's hard to mimic in a research environment. Because when you go to Ranger school, you're outside, you're freezing your ass off, or sweating your ass off, depending on what time of year you're there. You're not sleeping. You only get one meal a day. I mean, on and on and on. So those are things that we did not all package together when we abused these people. It was more just like a physical function thing. And the good news is that you're able to maintain that aspect of physical function in healthy people. So the idea being is that, so let me just say this, because I'm going to put my hypothesis on your podcast. I think that where testosterone has a potential great benefit, I think we're on the wrong end of the spectrum. I think that we as operators deficit spend the physiology. They go out for 2 or 3 days, 48, 72 hours, right? High op tempo, high everything, right? Come back, recover for 24, go out again. But the problem is, and in fact, again, Stefan showed this in several studies. We did a MARSOC study with Marine Special Operations where they had SERE training, survival, escape, resistance, evasion. Since you started that, I'll go with all this. I'll inform your listeners on what all this means. And so what happens is, it's a course basically designed to do all that, survive, escape, resist. But obviously, the part of the course is you get captured, air quotes, and you get into a POW and they beat the shit out of you for several days, don't feed you, whatever. Well, the point is that whatever it was, 72 hours was so stressful on the physiology that many days later, after they got out of that, got back 3 squares at the mess hall, et cetera, they still did not recover the body protein homeostasis. In other words, you were still deficit spending the physiology. We found the same thing in this recent Ops 2 thing, that even after the 21 days of recovery, eating what they want, slept how they want, still not there. So that tells me that these physiological insults must be accounted for. And that what happens in the operational community, and by the way, I understand this, we all know this, so like the mission comes first, right? The mission comes first. But I think that we need to pay attention to the fact that, and this is maybe why these operators are so beat up by the time they're 35 years old, right? We end up taking care of them the rest of our life because we beat them up so badly. They deficit spend the physiology to such an extent that it actually never recovers. It's like, in the athletic realm that we start off this conversation with, Nick, it's like overtraining, chronic overtraining. You trying to perform, I'm going to work harder, or I'm going to work harder, but you end up chronically overtraining. So you never recover the muscles. You never recover the physiology that you need. So you're always tired, you're less than optimal, et cetera. I think this is what happens in the special operations community. And by the way, they become hypogonadal during that point. And that's where I think we need to think about intervening, in that both nutritionally and hormonally, pharmacologically, we need to see what we can do to get that physiology back to optimal as soon as we can. Now, that's Arny's bias. and that's from his 30 some years of work in this area. And I'll bet I'm right. I'm hoping to do that work here shortly. I got some things in with the DoD. But I just think that that's what we need to is start looking at, because in fairness, as you know, military op tempo doesn't say, okay, these guys go out for 3 days, and it's not like a pilot, like we give them, ideally crew rest time, right? Well, crew rest time goes out the window when combat missions are involved too. So I just think that we don't have that luxury of saying, okay, after 72-hour mission, now they're out for 48 or 72 hours. We don't have that luxury. So we got to figure out ways to optimize the physiology for this continued high op tempo.
No.
Long-winded answer. I apologize, but I hope that helped.
No, that all was gold, and it's a perfect segue because especially, I mean, it's kind of wound down for now, but when Iraq and Afghanistan were at the height, what you just described is what those operators were going through, and then now we're kind of seeing those individuals that served through that at the age of 36, 37, they're this operator syndrome. Where it just like it never recovers. Their testosterone never recovers, and so just kind of just observationally, I'm seeing some more use of replacement therapy. And so again, having you on, there's nobody else better that I personally know to talk about this. What are your thoughts on somebody under 40 going on testosterone replacement therapy? These kind of older warfighters getting on there, and are there any specific risks that maybe people don't know about that they should think about it before making that decision?
I think there's two separate issues we have to discuss in this regard. First of all, I noticed, in fact, a good friend of mine that was on the gymnastics team with me, he was 3 years behind me, but his name's it was Colonel Fran O'Connor. He's retired now, but he had a prominent position in the medical community there. He was an MD. Great guy, great gymnast. But I remember we had a reunion, a gymnastics reunion a number of years ago at West Point, and he and I got into this conversation about the physiology. And it was obvious to me that there was a great resistance from the medical community to do the testosterone thing. My argument was that I think it was physiologically naive, number one. Number two, I hate to say this, but what makes you think the special operators aren't doing it anyhow? I think most people understand that. And my point is, let's take charge of this from a clinical management, medical management standpoint, physiological management standpoint, rather than have each individual soldier who's not knowledgeable in this try to regulate their own performance, et cetera. So I think that I think more work, first of all, Nick, more work needs to be done in the special operator community, okay? Because to me, the idea is how hypogonadal are they and how long does that last? Because if it's not dramatic enough, then I wouldn't recommend the testosterone, to be honest with you. In the clinical realm, we use the testosterone for people who are hypogonadal, have lost the opportunity to produce. And that, by the way, everybody thinks it's old guys with white hair and bald like me, but it's really not. It's becoming increasingly more popular with people starting at 40 years of age and younger, depending on what happens. And I think this community that you just described after they retired, 41, 42, a lot of them are hypogonadal for a lot of those reasons. They just burned out the physiology. You burn out the axis. So there's plenty of research, and in this regard, one of the primary researchers in testosterone replacement therapy, TRT, is a guy named Shalander Beijing, who's he's in Boston now. Great guy, endocrinologist, just has a sterling record of longitudinally looking at all the aspects of testosterone replacements, everything from different doses to cardiovascular effects, et cetera, in older populations. I looked at it in early days from the standpoint of protein turnover, protein metabolism, mechanism, et cetera. But Shally has really looked at it clinically. Now, I had a few clinical studies. But the bottom line is this, is that From my experience, it gives you when you're hypogonadal and you have the symptoms. Now that's the important point because a lot of people are hypogonadal, but they don't seem to have a problem with it. But if you're hypogonadal and have the symptoms, i.e., you're tired, your performance is down, you know, for guys like you and me who are quite active in our life, we're the guys who would notice it first, to be honest with you, right? Because you're like, ah, shit, I'm just not recovering. Like I go to my doc. By the way, my PCP is literally at the end of my hall here, a colleague of mine, MD, PhD, endocrinologist, brilliant guy. And, you know, I'd go to him, man, I just can't recover. He said, that's because you're getting freaking old. You know what I mean? That's the kind of care I got from my doc. Yeah, that's because you're old. That's because you're old. Well, I know I'm getting old, but the point is I also know physiology. I also know that, like, I'm just having trouble. So those are the things that, you know, you finally say, okay, let's take a look at these parameters and see if they need intervened upon. And so I think that's the important aspect there is that, like, what is it you want to do with your life? And I think, like, if, you know, you're going to be a kind of guy who's going to be 50, 55, 60, and you're going to want to be active. Well, the question is we're always pay the bill. I always say this, Nick, we always pay the bill for our life, right? I was a gymnast all those years. I've had umpteenth number of orthopedic surgeries related to that. You pay the price, you pay the bill. I wouldn't do anything different, to be honest with you, just like I wouldn't have done anything different in my military career, but we're going to pay the price. The physiology only guarantees you so much. These parts wear out. I got a prosthetic hip, like, you know, 12 years ago. So the parts wear out. So you just have to, I think, you know, adapt and overcome, as we say, accordingly.
No, that's great, and you know, a great way to look at it. Yeah, there's a guy, Dr. Andy Galpin. I've heard him say his phrase. I love it. There's no free rides in physiology.
That's right.
Yeah, so I quote that with the student.
By the way, is physiology always wins.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, you got to keep that in mind.
But kind of one thing I did want to just to be sure is, like, yeah, are there any kind of, like, risk factors that you would highlight, or no, or is that something they just need to talk to their primary care provider, you know, with their kind of history to look at? But I mean, I didn't know if there was any, like, high points in terms of if you're thinking about going on TRT, these are things to consider.
Yeah, there are. And again, Shally has characterized those nicely. I mean, in older populations, there's an increased risk of some cardiovascular events. But again, see, here's where we diverge, you and I and Shally. Shally is looking by and large at the large clinical population. They're not us. They're not 65 and still exercising every day and things of that age, because obviously that's very protective. So, I mean, in fairness to Shally, that's the 99% of our population, right? And that's what he looked at, and he's done a fantastic job at doing that. And so if you look at that, if you fit into that 99%, that you're not a frequent exerciser, not very active, et cetera, then I think you need to pay attention to those things. But I will say this, that by and large, the idea, here's where clinical medicine differs from the gyms where testosterone got a bad name. You know, in those sports, you know, power sports, bodybuilding, whatever, the testosterone goes to super physiological ranges. By the way, any hormone below or outside the range is very problematic. That's the way our biology is set up. That's the way our physiology is set up. They're very problematic. However, the idea in clinical medicine is to normalize that. So if you come into your clinician, so let's say the normal range of testosterone assays in most clinical labs is somewhere around 200 to 1,000. You know, a 30-year-old kid will probably be somewhere in the 500 to 600 range, 700 range, depending, okay? Older people tend to be in the 400, you know, range or below. So if you come in and you have a testosterone of 200 nanograms per deciliter, well, the clinician's going to try to get you back to 35 years of age. He's going to adjust, he or she is going to adjust the injection of testosterone, whether it's an anthate, cypionate, or undecanoate, whatever preparation you guys decide to use, to mid-range. So the idea is he's not going to take you from 200 to 1200. That's not what we want to do. And obviously 1200 is going to give you some problems. He wants to take you from 200 to like 500, so that now, all those things that we were talking about, failure to recover, fatigue, and on and on and on, those things tend to dissipate there. So I tend to use the term normalization of testosterone. I think that's the better way of looking at it clinically.
No, and that's a great point and a great way to characterize it, because that was also, I don't know if we talked about that, but I also want to make clear is that's what you were doing even in your research with the military folks. You weren't giving them super physiological levels. You were maintaining the level that we know plummets when you're in an energy deficit, when you're under stress, when you're under so we're not.
That was the idea, obviously. I mean, because as you know, in human research, you can't endanger the subject either. Right. So you're not going to do things that are going to put that subject at an increased risk or danger.
No, that's great. What are your, you talked about how you're still training, at your age. Are there any secrets to your longevity? Because having been around you, I mean, you're high energy, you're fit, you're still doing all these things. You've had you did a sport that's hard on the body, competitive gymnastics at a, high collegiate level. What are kind of your, are there any secrets you can share for folks who want to maintain?
Well, I will say I have learned the lessons from the 30-some years of physiological work. In fact, what you saw me drinking there was the essential amino acids. I take them regularly. I take advantage of all the things that we've learned in this field, including like you had Rick Kreider on, Dr. Rick Kreider, and talked about creatine. I routinely use creatine. I ensure I get enough sleep, which we had talked about before we went on air. Just all those things, because the sad fact of aging is, and you're going to find this, by the way, since your early 40s, you're going to find a huge difference in your physiology between 42 and 52. And you're going to find that the ability to recover is what you really notice. Now, again, I'm talking about guys like you and I who do things every day, remain fit at a higher level, do a number of very high up-tempo activities. If you're a land squid, you probably won't notice much of this, right? Because you're not testing the system. But again, for those of us who kind of like to take big gulps of life while we can, you have to understand that you just have to adjust. I mean, even 10 years ago, I hate to say this, but I'm doing less than I could do 10 years ago. Parts have worn out. Shoulders are gone, and, hips are gone, and on and on and on. So, I mean, you just have to adjust. It's still the same mantra that we first learned when we were 20 years old: adapt and overcome. I think that's really what it is, Nick. I've just taken advantage of the knowledge I have in terms of nutrition, physiology, pharmacology, et cetera, and done that so that I can remain, highly active at this age.
No, and you've done a great job of that. And even at 42, it's funny. I was thinking that the other day, just what you said right there, in terms of on any given workout, I can hit about 95% of what I used to. It's not like I'm slower, but not that much slower, not that much weaker, etc. But it's the recovery. It's if I do something hard one day, all bets are off the next.
That's right. You ain't doing it the next day.
I'm not doing it the next day.
You nailed that. I think that's exactly correct. And I would also say this, and I've given talks on this before. As you get older, and my one little piece of pontification here, as you get older, you've got to throw the past away, because what you could do at one time is freaking irrelevant. Like, we could go through and talk shit about like how much you could bench, and it's irrelevant. You can't do it anymore. So, the point is that like you just keep saying, what can I do now and what can I move forward? That's what, and so many people live in the past, you know what I mean? No matter how big of a stud you are, you're not going to be the same at 42 that you were at 22. Okay, again, that's the earlier point. Physiology always wins, right? Physiology, always had to say. So Yeah, I think that's the point. You just got to realistically look at it. In all fairness, too, Nick, if you extrapolate to 70s, 80s, and 90s, my dad's 94 years of age, and
Wow.
he's in a retirement community, and no comorbidities, none whatsoever. I'm on a statin. He's not on a statin. You know what I mean? And he's highly functional, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the idea, is that, as you just keep adjusting fire. You know what I mean? The target array changes. It's like, as you get older and older, the idea of the exercise and all that is to remain functional. Because if you're old and non-functional, you got a miserable life ahead of you. It's just that simple. So, now we're able to do these things, but this is how it translates. People say, why do you do all that exercise, et cetera? Well, I'm in the Department of Geriatrics. I see it every day. People coming in, canes, wheelchairs, et cetera. And in fairness, most of it's of their own choosing. Again, like I use the land squid. I mean, if you chose to be a land squid, Nick, I say this all the time, people choose their way to die. I hate to say that, but it's so true when you think about it. Like, if you decide to become morbidly obese, get type 2 diabetes, and all the things that come with that, that was the choice you made. You in essence, chosen your way to die. You know what I mean? You and I may die of more, elaborate or elegant means. Maybe it's, jump out of the plane, or maybe, whatever it is. But, you've got an opportunity to do something at a different level. So, not complaining, I'm just saying.
No, that's I like that line. Yeah, people choose their own way to die. Any resources you can recommend for folks, or in terms of protein things, if interested in this topic?
Yeah, I would say that I'll toot our own horn here, but there's several in our area that have written a number of good reviews about the amount of protein to take in at different ages. My colleague Stu Phillips out of McMaster's has done a lot with like protein and exercise. So I think he's a good source. Stuart Phillips, if you just Google the names, there's thousands come up. Anything again with Robert Wolfe in it, WOLFE, and my last name is Ferrando, so we've written a number of things, especially in terms of the EAA and the effects and all the effects in different circumstances, et cetera. Again, the testosterone, the clinical realm, Beijing is Bhasin, Schallander, he goes by Shally. Clinically speaking, he's the man in that regard. But again, all these things we talked about, you can find just by simply Googling. They'll take you to, PubMed publications, et cetera. But the bottom line is, it's all there. It's all there.
No, thanks for that, and I'll put all that in the show notes and links to your work on like Google Scholar, et cetera. Where can folks find you, Arny? I mean, can people get in contact with you? Are you out there, or you prefer to be low key in Arkansas?
Well, no. You're welcome to give my email and all that stuff. I am not a social media guy. I'm a boomer, and I just do not have a thrill for any social media format platform whatsoever, because I get that all the time when I give my talks, like, what's your Twitter handle, or whatever the hell they say. It sounds like they're swearing at me, but the point is I have no desire to do that. I have two young colleagues here, and I told them part of their responsibility here is what we call the BAP, the Boomer Assistance Program. So they make up for my technological deficits in many ways in that regard, and they're very active on those things, and they keep up with that stuff. But I'm at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. If you go to the uams.edu, you'll find my link and my email there. But I have no social media platform presence or anything. But again, between Google and my colleagues and email and your pass-through or whatever you want to do, I'm certainly make myself available. But I'm not tweeting everything every day or whatever those things that you guys do.
We don't have you on social yet. Hey, Arny, you were just on a podcast, so
I know.
now you're on social. So
it's a big step for me.
That's a big step. I'm so happy I was able to get you on. Hey, Arny, I know you've got things to do. I really appreciate your time, being so generous, sharing all this great information. I know listeners are going to get a lot out of it, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you, Colonel Behringer. Again, I'm honored. It's great seeing you as always as a friend, and I enjoy, I enjoyed my association with you over many years. I enjoy our work together. So I hope to continue it. So anything else I can do, just holler.
Will do. I'll have to come down to Arkansas and visit you soon.
Would love to. Would love to.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Have a great day.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, that's our episode of Fuel the Fight. Hope you enjoyed that. Be sure to, like, subscribe the episode wherever you get your podcasts.